Hello, everyone. Welcome to Frog Talks, the inaugural Frog Talks, the beta. We're excited. We have a huge audience. Great speakers. We wanted to bring together some movement makers, some movement doers, some thinkers, people who have great ideas in order to inspire all of us to think about movements or starting our own movement. And I want to actually ask all of you if you'll stay. I know many might need to leave. Stay to the end because we are going to launch a beer movement. And you're not going to want to miss that. It's going to be pretty awesome. So, movements. You know, we're living in the age of movements. Of course, you look around this country and around the world, we are living at a time where there are movements everywhere, all over the place. And movements are like a force. They can be a force for good, or they can be a force for evil. It's a bit like Star Wars. How you use the force depends on you. And that's important because the truth is every single one of you in this room, every single individual, every company, every brand, every entrepreneur can create a movement, can identify, crystallize, align with, and spark a mass movement that reaches deep inside people and turns them on. It's like you reach inside, you flip a switch, and you're activated. And tears just appear. And boom, everything changes. And for good or for bad, nothing is ever the same. And the reason that's important is because we're living in a world with huge challenges. And sometimes we need to stop and realize that we need to say to you, here's an idea you need to hear. Or more importantly, here is something that you need to do. Or here is something that you need to do differently. Movements are based on ideas, or emanated from ideas, but they're grounded in action. That's what we're asking people to do. And all of you are movement makers. You can be movement makers because you are dreamers of dreams. And that's where it starts. And today, this whole event is intended to inspire you. And we have some extraordinary speakers who are going to give us some really great insights. Now, this lovely creature on my right is here to remind us of our attention span. We look at the goldfish who has an attention span of 8 seconds. Human beings, we have an attention of less than that. So the reason why we have him here is to remind us why we started Frog Talks. We want to have the shortest talks on the planet. Big movement ideas, super short and sharp talks. So over to the east, past the concrete, past the roads and the buildings and the architecture, there's a water, big water. There's a bay, the Great South Bay. Why does saving the Great South Bay matter, Marshall? Maybe you could tell us. Come on up, please. Give Marshall a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Well, thank you, Scott and StrawberryFrog, for inviting me here. The talks so far have been really wonderful, and look forward to telling you our origin story first. It was my 35th high school reunion some 5 years ago. We just moved back to Long Island. I've been away for 35 years, but went off to college. But we moved back to Long Island to raise our family. So I come back to my hometown, and I walk to the end of the street where I grew up with my then 11-year-old son, and we got into the bay, and we were there maybe half a second because the water was so, it's coffee colored. It was gross, and wasn't at all the bay I'd remembered. So that night at our reunion, that's all we could talk about because we come from all over the country to be back, and a lot of had seen the bay, and we couldn't believe it. So we vowed right there and then that we were going to do something about it, and so there was born Save the Great South Bay. That was 12 weeks to the day before Sandy. So Save the Great South Bay today has some 12,000 people in it from communities all over the South Shore, whether it's, I don't know if any of these names are familiar to you, Bablin, Patchogue, Bayshore, Bellport, Blue Point, Amityville, some 30 towns, and all deeply historically connected to that bay. Our mission is to restore the bay so that we can swim, fish, clam, sail as we have for generations. But it's going to be a lot of work, as you'll see soon. There we go. Can a beer save the bay? Well, I think you'll see it just may. But before we get to that question, we really need to first look at the problems that are facing the bay. So there it is, the collapse of clamming. This represents the three towns, Bablin, Islip, and Brookhaven. So there about 1976, we have 700,000 bushels of clams coming out of the bay. That's half of all the hard-shell clams eaten in this country for generations, and generations came out of that bay. Until we hit 1985, and it basically falls off a cliff. Well, why? Because we have a nitrogen problem in the bay, and it's causing these massive algal blooms. That's the brown tide there, rust tide here, red tide here, anoxic places there where the algae has basically depleted the area of oxygen, creating these dead zones. It is a catastrophe of epic proportions, and it's something that a lot of people really don't know about. So there it is, the biggest environmental crisis you never heard about. And what's causing it? Well, 500,000 cesspools and septic tanks in sandy soil. 26% of Nassau County is unsewered. 74% of Suffolk County is unsewered. And what happens? That nitrogen leaching out of the septic tanks goes into the groundwater, and it's like fertilizer. It hits the bay, and the algae goes crazy. And then with the brown tide, what happened was it obscured the bay bottom for a couple months, and all the eelgrass died, all the habitat for the clams and fish. And that was it. 6,000 people working the bay lost their livelihoods overnight. So what is Save the Great South Bay doing about this? Well, there are some 42 creeks that flow into the Great South Bay along the South Shore. So we established this Creek Defender program so that each creek would have its own local steward, and from the 12,000 people in our group, they are volunteering for cleanups. For instance, this Hardy Bunch here, they pulled out 28 car tires and 2 shopping carts within 2 hours. That was one group of 10 out of the 8 that we had for Earth Day in Bablin when we launched the Creek Defender program. Then there's the I Love Long Island campaign. We also launched that on Earth Day. We have now some 30 organizations, environmental organizations from all over Long Island, and the message is very simple. Anything that you put on your lawn ends up one of two places: in the bay or in your drinking water. Long Island also has a unique situation where we live on top of our drinking water. It's a sole source aquifer left by the glaciers. A lot of people on Long Island don't know that either. And then this is my favorite of our 3 initiatives because it can both rescue the bay and restore the economy. This is what happens when you leave oysters in a filthy, algae-infested fish tank for a day. One oyster can filter 30 gallons of water a day. And so what would happen if you had 5,000 acres of oysters? Well, according to one scientist, that would solve 147% of the nitrogen problem. And every acre of oysters can yield $100,000 of revenue a year. So there's a $500 million industry, and you clean the bay. So that's what we're trying to get to, if we can get the water quality good enough that's possible. And here's how, in part, we will be able to support these 3 initiatives. I will tell the story now of the origin of Drink the Bay Clean. For years, I'd wanted a beer for our nonprofit. I like beer, first of all. And I'm really bad at asking for money. So I figured if we had a beer to support the org, that would be great. Well, these things are a lot easier said than done, and very complicated. It's a great idea in theory, but how is it all put together? Well, it was then I decided I'd take a meeting with a gentleman who was here today, Mark Burford, who is the brewmaster emeritus and founder of Blue Point Brewery. And it was a meeting, I don't know what it was about, but because the first sentence he said, before we get started, I want you to know I'm making you your beer. And the man is true to his word. Here it is today. We can't keep it on the shelves. It's so good. It's an India Pale Lager, if you've ever had it. There you go. There you go. come to Papa. right. It's not only for a good cause, but it's really fantastic beer. So they can't make enough of it, but they're scaling production to meet the demand. And to your point earlier, Scott, this is absolutely something that we can take to other bays around the world, because one of the things that Mark did was he sold his brewery to InBev, which is the world's largest beer maker and distributor. And there's certainly bays around the world. I don't know how many beers have actually been made for an environmental cause, but this is it, and I think that this model should and ought to be replicated. So now I would just like to invite you all to help us out by drinking the Bay Clean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marshall. I think everyone else looks forward to tasting your beer. We are going to cut the cord in the back, and we are going to have this launch of the movement to drink the Bay Clean. So I invite you all to come and mingle and enjoy us, and Marshall will lead us in the cracking open of our first 200 cans of Drink the Bay Clean. Thank you.